Roguelikes You Should Know is sponsored by Ox and Cadence. Spend your hegemony credits only and the best weapons to help you take out the dragon, defeat the rat, and kill your past. Visit Ox and Cadence and mention code DISCOUNT10 for 10% off code valid on qualifying purchases. Ox and Cadence! Available in the breach.
So, Scott, question for you. Just something that I think that I've been wondering this past week. How do you tell the difference between a rat and a mouse?
Oh, I think it's attitude.
Just you're telling me that there's no scientific difference whatsoever, and it's
man, this wasn't in the notes. You're springing.
Well, hey, I mean, yeah, I mean, but honestly, like I look at a certain game that we're going to talk about here, and I go, are those rats? Or are they mice? And I got to a point where I went, what is the difference between a rat and a mouse, other than what you would see on like the Muppets, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I totally think of a completely different thing in my mind when I think mouse versus rat, right? And
yeah.
And I even remember growing up, if I may, my brother watching his science class's pet rat over summer. So there was a red-eyed white rat in the house for a month and for over a summer that my brother was taking care of. But you have either one of them in your house and you probably want it out.
It's not something that, unless you've intentionally brought it in, that you're going to think, ooh, it's a good thing, you know? I mean, I'm looking up right now mice and rat, like, difference pictures, and other than, like, the ears, I'm no expert, clearly, but I cannot tell the difference. I think it's like, I'm seeing rounder ears, like Mickey Mouse ears on a mouse. So at least Disney did something accurate for once. So if anyone who has clicked on this and is watching the episode, you've probably read the title of it. We're going to be talking about Ratropolis today.
People may tune in for the game, or they may tune in for the defining the term.
The rat versus mouse. That's going to be the primary. That's going to be what I'm going to lead with on the episode title. Is it a rat or a mouse? That's going to be it. That's why people will be listening here.
So let's just get to it. Rat or mouse? Roguelite.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about We're going to be talking about roguelikes, but focus. We're going to also talking about Ratropolis, a roguelike. Ratropolis is kind of a roguelike.
It's roguely?
It's roguish.
So here's the deal. If you go onto this game's store page on Steam, right, it starts with a fusion of roguelite, tower defense, city building, and deck building.
And see, I didn't know when I saw this game. It's in early access right now. And so we decided to pick it up, check it out for the episode. This is one that I had picked for us to check out and play. I had no idea about this game beforehand. It's a little bit on the fringe of what you could call even a roguelite at times, depending upon your definition. So we are definitely going to talk about the definition, but let's not get way too far ahead of ourselves. First, let's talk about this game itself, Ratropolis itself.
Okay.
The game itself, the gameplay mechanics. I know you've played it a lot more actually than I have. I only have about 5 or 6 hours in the game. I think you've got a solid 20 plus.
Oh yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
So walk me through. So the gameplay mechanics, as you said in their description, and they're not wrong, it's a mixture of some version of roguelike elements. It's got tower defense. It's got a deck builder in there. It's got sort of city building, kind of. How would you describe it, though?
I think the tower defense is the lead. Very liberal use of city building. Very, very liberal use of the term roguelike.
Yeah, very, very, very. The city building, I'd say, is for the purpose of getting things so that you can do more tower defense.
Right. I mean, the idea is waves are coming in. In roguelikes and roguelites, generally, you are the wave going through the dungeon. The tower defense is the waves are blasting past you, and you're either surviving or thriving between each waves.
But even from a tower defense perspective, it's kind of even very loosely there. I mean, you have your central building that you're defending, and it's really only waves coming from two different sides on a very almost it looks platformer-esque plane. It's just a 2D front sideways plane. But that's it. There's no redirecting. There's no perspective.
There's a lot of redirecting. For the way I've played.
But you can't send someone down a different path. That's what I meant by redirect.
Yes, once they're stationed, they can go forward or back.
The enemies cannot be sent down a different path. They're going to go straight at you from either side. Most tower defense, there are ways of redirecting and
Right. And there's some mobs, bad guys that are going over the walls, so you have to kind of account for them. So the layers of the wall. So the way you described it to me when I was like Ratropolis, I don't really like the fighting rodent subgenre theme. But you first tried to give it a shot by saying, "Oh, it's like that game you like, Kingdom, which is a pixel art 2D noble on a horse with a crown, and if you get hit, you lose that crown. It's permadeath." And this, instead of dropping coins or directly moving pieces on the board, this does have that aspect that I will almost always give a shot as a subgenre, and that is deck building. So you give me tower defense and deck building. The very beginning of each game is the fact that you get hit in the head with time is a major resource. And that was something that made me roll my eyes right from the get-go. Like, I hate that.
It felt so very mobile game with that time element. You know, you can only take so many and you have to wait, but it wasn't like you have to wait for your hearts to replenish like mobile games, but that was the feeling I got with immediately. And that wasn't honestly the best foot forward for the game for me, because that was I've been burned and have my heart broken by mobile games that end up starting off a good game. The developers get greedy and add that element in eventually later. And so when I saw that time was something involved with it, I instantly went, "Oh, what is this? A mobile game?"
And the real element is that there's just basically about a 15-second cap on when you can draw your next hand. That's that, and the waves. When the waves come, which it's a tower defense. Time is going to be that's tower defense. So we already kind of are okay as tower defense fans. We're down with the waves and getting money if we're going to let the waves come sooner. Done. No problem. Yeah, very satisfying. That's fine. But now you're saying, all right, I got this crappy hand of 5 cards that don't really work together. 1 cheese, a house, a guy I can't afford, and then 2 other things, which maybe I'm going to get some money, maybe not. But it's just not an unexciting hand. And you're like, great, now I have to wait 15 seconds just to get another crappy hand.
Almost all of the RNG has to do with which cards show up when in the merchant, in different chests. As you defeat waves of enemies, you get to pick between adding a new card, removing a card. The enemies and waves themselves are pretty well set. They get a little bit difference on the exact mix, but you know about in each wave when the stronger enemies are coming, like a tower defense. So it definitely feels like what they did is they sort of took that tower defense and said, okay, but almost all the RNG, almost all the roguelike, so to speak, elements are going to be in the card system. And so it's, from my perspective, I almost feel like, and maybe this is sort of my main beef with it, I almost feel like it's 2 separate games that are getting mashed together. Because it feels like you have that pseudo tower defense. If you remove the deck building element from this game, there's not a lot of RNG. Yeah, there's the permadeath, etc., but there's not a lot of variation. It's kind of the same run every time. It's just a difference of which cards show up. Yeah, from a deck builder perspective, I'm not of the opinion, and maybe this is something that we could talk about, is does just adding a deck builder mechanic to a game improve the game in any way if it wasn't set for it? There are so many, as you know, there's straight up Slay the Spire clones, but deck builders have become the game to make over the last 2 years if you're going to make an indie game. And I feel like there's a lot of them, like we've seen games which are like action games, but a deck builder. I mean, even, was it the Steam World got into the deck builder? They did Steam World, was it Steam World Quest, I believe, which was a new deck builder in the Steam World. But it feels like a lot of times it's just, we have a game and deck builders are cool. Let's throw a deck builder.
Well, I'm such a fan of the genre. I'm such an apologist, Skip. I'm such an apologist because it's just a very clear-cut way of delimiting choice. And it's very hard to say, that this is just a illusion of choice or a choice simulation. When you're given the damn cards in your hands and you have to play them or draw another hand or figure out some way to mitigate. The way that it just kind of RNG happens in Slay, and just especially early on, and you get crushed, so you got to play again. It's pure chaos down here, and it could end horribly for you right from the get-go, or it could end horribly for you right before you're about to beat the boss at the end.
The problem that I have with the deck builders specifically is the problem in how fast you go from your starting deck to a deck that has some sense of direction. Slay the Spire gets there relatively quickly. By the end of the first act, if you don't know which direction you're going, you should reset. Like, you're not going to have a successful run. By floor 8 or 9, you're going, I'm going to be focusing on this in some way, even if that slightly shifts. And so you've got a pretty quick reset if nothing really starts to happen. A lot of the deck builders that I get frustrated with, like even Griftlands, which I think was a fantastic, spin on it, it took so long to get to the point where you felt like your deck was starting to not be a starter deck. And Ratropolis was having the same issue for me. If I felt like it was taking so long to get to the point where I was either adding and or removing cards to the point where I wasn't just having a starter deck.
That's interesting, because I was kind of surprised that for a deck builder with a standard starting size of about 10 or 12 cards, I think that it has, that the opportunities to cull came up a lot quicker in Ratropolis than in other cards. And in fact, the opportunities for adding more cards to dilute that Genesis deck. Cards are decisions, and they're just laid out very, very clearly. And the fact that you get to control the rate and what is in the makeup of your set or your fraction of decisions that are coming in, that's wonderful gameplay. That's wonderful. That's the ability, the smart ability to be able to arm a player. That's a system. That's what I was talking about in these past podcasts. That's what I'm looking for. And so if you can actually tell me that it's going to be a legitimate roguelike and a deck builder, and that's why I was such a huge Slay guy, because they pulled it off.
I think we have to take a detour right now, because we've talked a little bit around it. We've actually mentioned it in other episodes, but this game being so on the fringe of the rogue-ish, rogue-adjacent genre, for lack of an encompassing term.
And yet they use the word, in like the fourth word in their description, a fusion of roguelike, tower defense, city building, and deck building.
So that begs the question, right? What does it take to be a roguelike? What does it take to be a roguelite? And do we care enough to be gatekeepers of the two?
Skip! Do we care enough to be gatekeepers? What? Like you haven't created an online community and very successful popular YouTube series. You are a gatekeeper. I care about some.
I do.
You are the biggest fanboy of the genre that I think I know.
There are many who would say, but I don't like roguelikes. Because if you follow the strict definition of roguelikes, which... are you familiar with the Berlin interpretation of roguelikes? Are you familiar with this crap? And a lot of, basically, the early proponents of roguelikes was games that directly emulate the specific characteristics of the original game. This is like, if you ever wanted to look up the definition of gatekeeping, look up this definition of roguelikes. I'll post the link in all the comments. It's the Berlin interpretation of roguelikes. Basically, it's got some tenets to it.
So here's the deal. I work in data, and I have a lot of friends that work in data with me, and they are pedantic people. And smart people are pedantic, or not always, and not all pedantic people are not all pedantic people are smart.
They tend towards pedanticism.
And one of the things I always try to bring up with them when we're talking about the power of words and etymology is that we need to focus on meaning. What do people mean when they use these words?
If you look up how does a definition get into Webster's, if you look at how those actually do change over time, because the meaning of words actually do change, The biggest example of this is right now, you could Google it if you wanted to. Type the word literally into your Google search bar and look up Webster's definition of literally. The definition of literally actually now has a definition like point 2, meaning use of it is figurative. We actually have a word which means exactly the thing, which has become to be more commonly used as a figurative, which is the opposite of which is just the way that language goes. And so I think part of the argument, if you look at it, is it's not necessarily, well, what's the exact original definition of that word, but how is it used? How is it commonly used?
And when people say it, what is the motive? What is in people's brain?
What
I'm
are
not
they
an
thinking?
originalist with the law, but with some things in wordplay, it's important.
From a game perspective, that's very similar. And I think I actually went and looked up once when I was trying to figure out this whole thing about roguelikes, what actually makes it. I actually like, from a point of reference perspective, because I think it's a good foundation to set in, is, okay, what was it about Rogue that people actually liked when they distilled it down? Not from a what does every game need to be, but I think there are some important things in here that if you think about games that are tagging themselves with roguelike or roguelite in any way, well, what element are they pulling? Because though these are the common threads between all roguelikes and roguelike games. So the things that I had was things like random environment generation. So that's the procedural level generation, which everybody knows those words. Permadeath. Those two things I think are the top two things people think of. But from here, it starts to go on a different path. They mentioned turn-based gameplay. So basically the style where when you move, everyone else moves. Think Crypt of the Necrodancer. Grid-based, so where every character occupies one tile space, right? Non-modal, which is that basically not a Metroidvania. So every action has to be available at every point in the game. You shouldn't, as you're going along, now pick up the Master Sword, and now you can go over here and do something else. Complexity, which has to do with the fact that there's not a single solution, so it's not Portal, it's not a puzzle game. Lots of ways to beat the game. Resource management, this one was really specific, that you have to have limited resources. You have to be able, that you don't often know what those things do. Like, this was a really specific one that I think is really like, I'll get to my hypothesis around why all these things exist the way they do. Hack and slash, basically meaning that it's player versus the game and you're fighting enemies as opposed to PvP. And then there's exploration and discovery, which is basically that there's like a fog of war. You have to discover your area around you as you go through. And so these have been taken by, basically go to the roguelike subreddit if you want a heckin' good time of people trolling everyone for not knowing what a roguelike means. And they would adhere to, unless a game has all of these, it's not a roguelike.
So give me an example of your favorite roguelike according to the word police.
My favorite two are Tangle Deep and Crypt of the Necrodancer. Crypt of the Necrodancer takes all of these and adds a music element. Tangle Deep has all of these and just has a different art style and a couple different mechanics around how you learn attacks. But there are very few that I actually really like. Golden Crone Hotel would be the other one that I really like. That's actually a traditional roguelike. I think this is just a definition of what Rogue did. And honestly, was that, like, I think the biggest one to look at is resource management. So the fact that you have a limited number of resources and you don't know when you pick something up what it is until you use it. That may just have been how the game was developed, not because it was a choice, but because it was, well, that's how the game was. The fact that everything is one tile, well, this was ASCII art. Of course everything was one tile.
Why didn't we call Zelda ripoffs Zelda-likes? You know, it didn't seem like that. This one game. So the word police is saying that is what roguelike means.
Those are the.
And if you're
yes.
going to only choose some of those, or just permadeath and procedurally generated, if you're only going to choose some of them to make things that are roguish, then you shouldn't use roguelike. Because
that's where roguelites came
from.
Right.
Roguelite is 16 out of 16 or 8 out of 8 or whatever it is that they want to police.
Right. They're saying if you take any one of those, like The Binding of Isaac, it's not turn-based. So, it has a lot of the others. It actually has the resource management, hack and slash, exploration, discovery, complexity. It's non-modal for the most part. It's grid-based, it has permadeath and random. It has all but the turn-based combat, but that's a roguelite, technically. So that's the thing, is it's like, at what point are we sticking to the definition? Exactly.
Right, lame. How lame is that?
Because I think instead where most people are at when they go and search Steam for roguelike, or they go search it on Google, like the top roguelikes that I should play, where most of these elements actually exist. Think about even Hades. Think about The Binding of Isaac, Slay the Spire, Enter the Gungeon, Into the Breach, FTL. All of these games have at least half of these elements built into them. And they've just chosen to kind of swap out a turn-based combat style for, bullet hell. And I think that's a more beautiful part about it. And that's the reason why roguelikes to me are so interesting, because you have so many different varieties of games, yet they all do share a common thread of game elements that were inspired by Rogue. But at times I say roguelite, because honestly, I don't really feel like at times really saying, okay, if you have 7 out of 12, then you're a roguelike. Any less, you're a roguelite. That's just another form of, I think, gatekeeping it.
I just like to say roguelike. I think it comes off it's easier to say and write. I think it's more marketable, and I think it makes it feel like, yeah, there's only when people first hear it, they're like, oh, okay, what does that mean? Well, that means it's like permadeath, a run-based experience. Might be a little heavier on RNG if I succeed, because situation chance RNG lines up perfectly and I take advantage because of my experience, because I've gone through enough runs. Mm-hmm. That to me makes the permadeath aspect and the run the primary characteristic. The beginning of a run being this wide open canvas for you to paint and you to make a beautiful, unique run, so that when you crush and beat the game that you completely broke, you snap that screenshot of exactly how you did it and how crazy unique your relics or your boons or your good things are, or your curses that held you down.
Those are the two elements that I think, when you bring all these together, it means two distinct things that, for me, this is what a roguelike has to have for me to pretty much think, yes, it's a roguelike. It has to basically be, when I get done, when I beat this game, it's because I got better at it. Not because the game acknowledged the hours I put into it. The other side of it being, because of the complexity, which I think is one of the most underrated pieces of sort of this Berlin list. The idea that there's more than one way to beat the game. There's not this is the only path you can take. It's not Super Mario Brothers, where it's going to look the same every time you beat it. It's going to look different every time you beat it. And that's the beauty, is what magical way can I find to beat it? That's why The Binding of Isaac has been as successful as it is. People don't play the game because it's the same game every time. It's because, what crazy, stupid, broken way am I going to have to get through this game this time?
I think it's helpful to define what roguelikes are not. Roguelikes are not puzzle games. Mm-hmm. You cannot do traditional speedruns of roguelikes where you have memorized the order in which to push the buttons. Mm-hmm. They are not puzzles, which once you have learned, they're not the room. There is no reason for hardly anyone to play a lot of puzzle games more than once. And these are different than PvP games too, mm-hmm. where it's a battle of wits or skill mm-hmm. inside of a system.
It's different from open sandbox games.
It's actually more similar to open sandbox games than some of them. The opponent you're going up against is the algorithm, is the procedurally generated environment, is that tabula rasa. It's a brand new thing for you to conquer, a new planet for you to explore, whatever.
I have found something that I'd like you to consider, because I've had this conversation a lot about open sandbox games, where think about, I think Minecraft, the one that comes to mind for a lot of people. As soon as people learn about the genre, they start to see the games, we talk about the elements of kind of what makes up a game, they go, oh, so it's like playing Minecraft on hardcore mode then. I can see where people are coming from, right? The world is randomly generated, okay? You can do whatever you want to get to the final goal. There's lots of ways to do it, lots in quotes. But there's something that I thought of when I thought, but why does a roguelike feel so different from an open sandbox games, even though those elements are there? And I think there's something that's not on the Berlin interpretation list that I think is actually vitally important to roguelikes. So think about this. It's basically the concept of forward progress through some type of a dungeon. So think about Binding of Isaac. You're moving from floor to floor. You can't go back. Same thing for Enter the Gungeon. You can't go back to a previous chamber once you've proceeded on to the next. Same thing with FTL. As you pass from one zone to the next, you can't go back. Dead Cells, once you pass from level to level, you can't go back. All of the games that we really think about, there is a level of, now I'm done with that area, and I move on. Now I'm on to the next level. But with open sandbox games, you do. And I think that feeling of you have to move forward in the game is a very big distinction of roguelikes. At least that's been my opinion.
The way I've focused a lot on the system, the idea that you can't go back, the last level crushing behind you, you know. I'm still thinking of your Noida review.
Yeah. The world literally collapses behind you. Yes. Uh-huh.
Definitive nature of that. The way the future is sprawled out. You know, virgin snow, a huge pasture of opportunity. What's behind you is forever gone and crushed.
As you pass from floor to floor and slay the spire, I hoped you picked the right path. Curse of the Dead Gods, we're going to be talking about in our next episode, even more so highlights that, well, this choice eliminates those choices. You are now on this path. That third component, which is not on the Berlin list, is actually present in every single roguelike that I've played. I cannot think of a single one, Ratropolis, that doesn't have that.
Well, you do move on in Ratropolis. You can't go back to level 1. You're always moved on. You mean physically in the theme?
I suppose one thing about the waves will never back up. I suppose. Okay.
I'm not gonna try to. I told you it's pretty loose that they would use the term.
I mean, it's the whole reason why we're talking about it right now. Like, so given all of this, is this a non-roguelike you should know because it skirts?
I'm gonna write a review when I get done recording this. I do love this game, but I'm not sure it's a rogue. You know what it did? Here's what it is. You know what it said? A fusion of roguelite. You know what? That's a little bit less offensive. Maybe.
I think
they're trying to be a little bit less offensive.
Before we get to full review, before I set you loose, the art style, and the music. The art and the music, I always want to know your thoughts on the art and the music of the game.
I would say the art's getting a little bit better, but it's not nearly as good as it should be. Almost everything else about the important parts of this game are stellar. And it is growing on me, the quaint scale, size, and some of the details that they have in there. They're not going to change major aspects of the art and art style. They've just put way too much time into it. It is growing on me, but I do not love it. It's definitely not the best art in indie gaming or in this. And it is, like so much of this game, it definitely is growing on me.
The problem that I had with the art, I like the style, actually. I really like the style. It's a style of art I usually like. The problem is there's not enough distinguishing characteristics between the different Radissons. And so at a glance, I could never really tell how many of what type do I have there. Is that someone walking around, or is that a fighting person? Oh, is that the merchant walking up? There was not enough visual cues for me to see visually without looking at symbols or mousing over, no pun intended, for what's going on in my city. So music, what do you think about the music?
The main theme isn't horrible. It's just so repetitive, and it's
No.
If they made if they made slight variations for the different leaders, or completely different music for the other leaders, that'd be one thing. But it's so repetitive. Yeah. It's almost a liability.
Yeah, my music rating on this was muted, almost instant muted. It was like, nope. I listened to it through my first playthrough just to give it a good go to see if it would change, but it was, unfortunately, it was in the class of not just unnoticeable, but it was needing to be muted. So for me, that was a very big downside. I know for you it doesn't matter, you might mute it and put on your own music anyways, but for me, it was a very much a liability for the game on my end.
It's shocking. I haven't muted it. I haven't I don't have huge disdain for it, but it's not great.
I think we're here.
I think we're here.
What I need to know, in your words, in your rating system, which can change from week to week, how would you rate the game, Scott?
Well, I will judge it not based on this release or last release, but the trajectory.
Okay.
I've been playing it for a month. I will easily get past 50 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I will easily get past 50 hours. I am positively intrigued by the possibilities. They didn't have to animate and fully create as many mobs as they did with the other possibilities at this point in. They didn't have to make so many cards with so many different mechanics, with so much complexity, and there is a huge amount of complexity. They didn't have to make 6 different leaders this early on. The content, when I first started playing, you really couldn't see any kind of elegance in the system. Now that they've divvied up some of the content in the leaders with different little quests and different little helpful events that balance out some of the problems with them, they are right on their way. They're on their way to make something incredibly special, I think. And then I really haven't fully explored all the cards yet. So in a deck builder, I feel like I'm almost 50 hours in, and I haven't fully explored everything. And that there's so much dopamine drop there when you do unlock more, where you go, oh, okay, I see. And I'm giving them a lot of credit. A, early access. B, the fact that they have been able to make deck building and this tower defense weird city building thing work, in my opinion. That's such a huge advantage. The problems, I feel like, are really, really petty. But I do borderline love this game because I could see them making more cards that fix it. I think the pacing, to me, it was pure chaos at first, and I really wrapped my arms around it. And so, yeah, I'm a hardcore fan.
When I first had played it before the most recent release, if I had to rate it on what it was now, it would have been a pass. It would have been a because it didn't have enough going for it. If they continue their trajectory, I could see it being a solid pickup if you're okay with a deck builder where you don't get to determine your pace of play, which for me is a kind of a non-starter on a deck builder. It's why I didn't like the Cards of Cthulhu or whatever the heck that game. I think that was the name of it, right? It's another one of those weird deck builders where you don't determine your pace of play. But if they don't, I got to be honest, if this was their last major update, it's not far enough either. There's still room to go, where I would still say if they don't continue the development of where they're taking their cards and their synergies to, it's still a pass, because it doesn't, I don't think, go far enough to be one where I could see, unless you just became fanatical about it for whatever reason, which will always happen, I don't see that the final product is polished enough. So I think a lot will, just like with Skull, for me, depend upon where they take the game. It's never going to be a game I'm going to continue to play, because I do not like, as I made very clear, the non-controlled pace of deck builders, of this deck builder. But my ability to recommend it will be determined based upon where the game goes before final release or full release. That I've had enough of the strategy of this game. Like we're good, I feel like every good game in the genre is going to have that point where because again, it's not about you necessarily beating the game. It's about you feeling like you have accomplished what the game has asked you to accomplish. And that doesn't always mean getting to max level on everything. It could mean for Enter the Gungeon, you just get to the dragon and that's enough for you. It could mean you beat every character's past, but it's different for everyone. And that's part of the beautiful part of the genre. And, and I definitely hit the same way with Monster Train, where I was at the point where I went, you know what? I've got enough of the strategy of what each of these characters are about. I'm good.
Totally get that. Dicey Dungeon, I was curious about what that next Dice character was going to be like and the wacky elements to it. But I didn't feel like there was enough. It felt incredibly heavy with the illusion of choice, and very much not They didn't do a lot of window dressing to make it feel like I was more in charge of a certain strategy or. But this is definitely, in my opinion, if you're a fan of the deck builder, for sure, and you throw in tower defense, crazy that they even are trying, but I'm liking that they are. And I came in and very, very cynical. I was like, Skip, what am I having to play now? I don't have enough time to play games. I don't want to play weird games that I already know I'm not gonna like. I came in very, very upset.
You are going to be playing some weird games. That is my only guarantee. That's my only guarantee. So speaking of next games, the next episode, which will be dropping 2 weeks from this episode airing, the next episode will be dropping on the 11th of December. We're going to be playing Curse of the Dead Gods, another early access game. So
action,
that one will be fun.
A lot of action, a lot of demonic imagery.
Much darker theme. But yeah, and from a comments perspective, if you want to leave any comments, we'd love to hear what your thoughts. If you disagree with us, let us know. You can comment, obviously, if you're on YouTube, in the comments. Otherwise, you can find us on Twitter at the RYSK Podcast, is with a Y. The RYSK Podcast with a Y. You can find us there. You can leave comments there, or you can hop into Rogue HQ, which is just discord.roguehq.xyz. You'll find both Scott and I there. And please leave us a comment. Let us know. Otherwise, this has been fun. A game we disagree on ultimately, but I think still a good conversation. And we finally have a way that we can talk to your coworkers and say, hey, this is what a roguelike is. Just deal with it already. Just deal with it.
You know, and the pedantic will always have a reason to be upset in this world.
Can't fix that. All right. Well, it's been fun. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.